Okay, so now that the block out here is done, the next thing that we're going to do is we need to decide what the next step is going to be. So you can take this in like a few different forms. Now, you could go ahead and get started with like creating the final models and all of these sculpts and everything. Or you could go ahead and get started and create the textures. What I'm going to do is, because this environment so heavily relies on a few tileable materials, I want to go ahead and create these materials first. This is also because since we are using nanite, we can actually use displacement on our materials. So, for example, we can use displacement on like this wall material and stuff like that. And also, I'm not completely sure yet how intense our wood is going to be. And I might, based on that, change my sculpting and stuff like that. So, in this specific case, it's just easier for me to have my materials ready to go and then create all of the final models. Now, I went ahead and I created a text folder over here in our source files. And I created this text file, which is just called texture list. Now, if I go ahead and open this one up, I already went ahead and I already decided which materials I want to create as tileable materials. That's the key goal. Now, a wood material is quite obvious because we have a lot of wood. So I want to create a really good wood material. The ceramic roof material is going to be a little bit easier because as you can see over here, like it doesn't have that much detail. It has some interesting detail, but it's just going to be some base ceramic material, which we can then use in Substance Painter along with our all other grunges and nodes and all of that stuff to create a unique texture. Then we have our stone material and our stone wall material. The stone material will be used for things like the stairs and stuff like that. And the stone wall material will just be used for the sides over here. Now, one thing that you should keep in mind, and that's more like, because I already know how I'm going to create the environment, is that we are going to create a very special shader that I spoke to you, I believe in the very first chapter. And with this shader, we can basically push the resolution of our meshes in a way without adding too much extra expense. What I mean with this is that we will be creating more unique textures. So, for example, if we have like the roof pieces, we will actually create a unique texture instead of just using a tileable material. So in the old techniques, I would use a tileable material and then I would use like a mask or something like that to improve it. In the new technique, I am going to use a unique texture to literally completely uniquely texture our roof pieces or texture our wood pieces, all that kind of stuff, to really push the quality, get like the highest amount of quality. And then I will use special shader or material techniques to still have that texture look high resolution, even though, of course, having a unique texture on very large objects, like you can see over here, you would never be able to push in like enough resolution. So you can imagine like this. These textures will have like a unique base color and normal map, and for example, like all of the roofs combined will only be like a 1024 texture, or maybe if you want to push it like a 2048 texture. Just one base color and normal 2048 texture. And then we will have a shader that will manipulate that texture to make it look higher resolution. I know that might sound a bit difficult. To be honest, just bear with me. You just need to see it to believe it. However, for that, before I can create that material, it's good to just have already like some proper materials ready to go. Now, that was a way too long intro. But basically, what we're going to do now is we are going to go ahead and get started with the first one, which is going to be our wood material. For that, I'm going to mostly create a wood material that looks like the one over here, because I really like this type of wood. And I'm going to combine that with just like some general wood that I can see over here, in terms of like how the grains look. Maybe like some nice whitening and stuff like that, darkening, just like get some interesting effects on it. And I will also be looking like over here. Of course, this one is painted red, so take it with a grain of salt. But like I will be looking around in all of these images just to see like how that the wood looks, what we can do over here. Like there's another nice one, what we can do to make it more interesting, stuff like that. We will create this wood using Substance Designer in a procedural way. This will also allow us to have both like soft, clean wood, and then with very small changes, we can instantly also turn this into like some more rougher wood. Where are you? Like you can see over here with like these really thick lines and stuff like that. Now let's go ahead and jump into Substance Designer. So we can, at this point, let's see, we have our Unreal scene here, which I can close. And then here we have our Substance Designer scene. I have updated to the latest version of Substance Designer. This is important. Oh, sorry. Let me just get rid of this. This is important because Substance Designer, literally 2 days before I started recording this, released a very large update where we can use splines and stuff like that. And I also want to use some of those features. So do keep that in mind to update to your latest version of Designer if you want to use the same features I am using. But I do still try to keep it a little bit universal by using techniques that you can also do in older Designer versions. I'm going to get started with a new Designer graph. We can do metallic roughness and just call this like master underscore wood. 4K resolution is totally fine for this. And for the rest we don't really need to do anything, so I can just go ahead and press OK. Now here we have Substance Designer. The first thing I'm going to do is straight away in my textures folder create a wood folder, and in here I like to go ahead and I like to right click on my unsaved package and simply save my scene. I do expect that you have a little bit of like a basic understanding of Designer, or at least a little bit more than basic understanding, because Designer is quite a difficult program. So what I'm going to do is not run you through like the very basics, but just in general I will of course run you through every single node that I use. This is my default UI for Substance. What I always like to do is I like to always get rid of the 3D view, because I personally use Marmoset Toolbag to preview my textures. And for the rest, all of these views, you can just drag them around. So if they look different to you, you can just drag them around. If you miss a window, just go to Windows, and here you can find them also. Last thing that I'm going to check or show you, just in case you are new to Substance and still want to follow this around, is that you can go ahead and press space, and then you can type in all of the nodes that I will be using. This is a feature I will be using a lot. You can also right click add node, and here you can also find a few, or you can find all of your nodes in your library. Now, let's go ahead and get started with our wood. Now, what I'm going to show you is that I have a slightly newer technique of creating my wood grains. It's a little bit less flexible than the old technique that I used, which if you have ever watched any of my previous courses, you will know that one. But it is a little bit quicker to create. With this wood material, most of it is unscripted. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to show you my mistakes, because I often still use nodes that are very useful to know, and it is just easier than just like making the perfect material. I feel like you guys just don't really learn anything if I literally just like perfectly recreate the material that I've already created before. Especially because in Designer it's really all about like experimenting. So let's go ahead and get started. Now the first thing that we want to do is we just want to go ahead and create like very large scale shapes that we can use to define as gradients for our grains. I will just show you what I mean, and then we can run through it. Let's grab over here in our patterns a tile generator to get started with. Let's get rid of my 3D view. Don't know why it was back. Here we go. And then what I want to do is I want to go for something that's quite soft. So if I go ahead and go to my pattern and let's use my scroll wheel. Let's see. Yeah, let's use like a paraboid. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and set the Y amount to 0, because I want to have, of course, like long grains, like it's wood. I want it to be nice and long. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add like a bunch more. I'm just going to guess 25 for now. Next, what I want to do is I just want to like shuffle things around a bit. So I can go ahead and go for like a scale random over here. Let's go ahead and go for like an, well, offset random doesn't really work. Let's do a Y offset random over here. In the position, I mean. And then what we can also do is we can also give like the tiniest bit of like a rotation. Let's do 0.005 over here. Okay, so we got something like that. Let's do a little bit of luminance random also. This will just give us like some random intensity in our gradients. And then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and probably, let's see, let's set the Y amount a little bit less to like 22. And I want to like make these a little bit more fatter, so to speak. So what I can do is I can go in the interstance and set this higher. And then set my scale also a bit higher over here. And then I can use my random to kind of like randomly control the thickness, as you can see over here, of my shapes. And for the rest, it's pretty much just going ahead and playing around between like my amounts and my scaling until I get something that I like. Something like this, for example. Just like a base. Now, of course, we might want to go in and later on change it a little bit more. Then I'm gonna press space while I have my node selected and add a blur high quality grayscale. This is because, here, see, I'm not looking for defined shapes, I'm looking for random gradients, like this. So some darkening, some lightening, some whitening, stuff like that. Now that I have these, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add kind of like a grainy noise to this. And we need this grainy noise because later on we are going to map our gradients. And right now, if I would, for example, here, let me I can actually show you. Just to show you, basically what we are going to do later on is we are going to use a gradient dynamic node. And then with this gradient dynamic node, in the top, we want to grab our grayscale input, which is just like our texture. And then in the bottom, we want to grab our gradient input. For our gradient input, we need to add basically like a gradient pattern. What I'm going to do is, just for previewing showcases, I can probably use this one. Because else I would need to like recreate the entire thing. Just boost up the tiling. And now what you can see is that you get, it looks like wood grains, but you can see that it's like really, really soft. Like it doesn't look good at all. But if we add some really fine grains to this, really fine noise to this, it will actually start breaking up these edges. So that's what we are going to do now. And so just keep in mind what I just showed you. And for this, if we just go ahead and, oh god, didn't mean to do that. Let's make this a bit smaller. I was just organizing things. Let's go ahead and go to noises. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna often use like the directional noises. We have this one, which is like large scale directional noise. And then if we also go for, let's see, noise. No, 1 is too intense. Yeah, let's just do directional noise 3. I'm gonna set my angles to 90 degrees because we started with our texture being in that direction. So let's go ahead and set that. And then what you can do in here is you can also control, for example, like the angle random to give it like a little bit more unevenness. I'm then gonna go ahead and blend by pressing space and adding a blend. And in the background, I'm going to add my noise 4, my large noise. And in the foreground, I'm going to add my noise 3. Now I can have a choice between multiply over here or overlay. Because overlay is like a little bit whiter. But let's go ahead and try multiply and then just play around a little bit more with your opacity to not make it like too intense. Something like this. You can see that now the goal is that we have like a lot of these really fine grains going on. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply blend my blur high quality grayscale with this noise over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this one. Let's see, multiply is too much. Maybe overlay. Overlay is also too much. And min and max lighting also doesn't work. I'm gonna do multiply, but I'm going to like lower down my opacity quite a bit in that case. I just need like some very fine grains. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and first of all I want to kind of like clamp these values. And what I mean with that is I will grab a basic levels. And as you can see over here, my histogram scan is all the way on the left side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this back in. And I'm going to push actually this one also back in, over here. And now I want to just make everything a little bit more like softer white. This is because I do not really like having a giant, oh let's not do that one. I don't like to have a very strong difference between black all the way to white. I like to have like a gray value, because the gray values just read a little bit better. It is just experience knowing that I need to use this one. Now at this point what I will do is I will go ahead and I will start by creating the structure needed for our gradient dynamic. I can go ahead and I can do this by going into patterns. And I want to once again grab a tile generator. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically generate gradients. I can do this by going ahead and setting my pattern over here to, where are you? This one, gradation. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and set the Y amount to 0 and the X amount. Basically, this will control how fine our grains are going to be. The less gradients we have, the larger our grains are going to be. You can see it as a difference between these really large grains over here and these really fine grains over here. And what we are going to do is we are basically going to go ahead and create like a balance between the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and for now set it to like, I don't know, just going to do like 14 for example. I also want to go ahead and change my tiling mode, and I will show you why. Because if I want to go ahead and start by adding these different scalings, because I want to generally like change the scaling a little bit. When I do that, you can see that over here that if I try to scale it, it tries to repeat itself, and I don't want that. If I go to my tiling mode and set this to absolute over here, and then turn off the tiling, it will not tile around the corners. You can press space in your 2D view to see tiling, and now you can see that if I now go into my scale, see, it no longer tiles. But that also means that it's easier for me to simply push my scaling up, because I don't need tiling for this texture. So I'm going to basically push my scaling up until they are quite close together. And because I have the interstice, I hope I said it correctly, quite high up over here and also random, you can see that now we get like these random thicknesses in between our gradients. At this point you can also try and play around a little bit with your position random, just a tiny bit. And for the rest you don't need to play with rotation random. And I guess you also don't need to play with your luminance. Yeah, that wouldn't really do much. So what I can do now is I can show you what I mean. If I now go ahead and throw this into our gradient input, you can see that now it is starting to already get like these more rougher edges. At this point, like this one would be more like plywood. So I can go into my tile generator. And you can see that if I push up the Y amount, I get here more grains over here. Like that. Now, I'm still not happy about a bunch of stuff. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and probably go in my blend and play around with the opacity. And now you can see that that really affects quite heavily how strong our edges are going to be. So I want to go for, yeah, it is quite wide. It's not too sharp, and it is quite wide. And yeah, you can see over here, like it has these interesting shapes. So, but it has quite a few lines sitting next to it. So if I go ahead and, let's see, set the opacity to something like, let's do 0.4 in our overlay of our noises. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably go ahead and in my levels, let's try and add a directional blur behind it. At this point, we are basically going to just balance things out, which is unscripted. Like, the beginning was not scripted, but like I know exactly how to do the beginning. And now it's more like just trying and seeing. So I'm going to go double click on my gradient, click once on my directional blur. And I can use this blur to basically have very soft control over my edges. It looks like that the control is not really super intense right now, but that is fine. The next thing that I'm going to do is, because I want to have like a nice blend between these larger shapes and these smaller ones, I feel like that it might be nice if I make this shape, for example, like a little bit larger over here. And if I then go ahead and actually select both my gradient dynamic and my tile generator and duplicate it, and the second one I'm going to just make like way smaller, so we have like these really fine grains. Now we can go ahead and we can blend these two, and it kind of depends like what you want from your wood. So there's two ways that we can blend them. We can just literally plug them together. And I believe if we just go into our blending mode, which one is the best one? Let's set the opacity like quite low. Multiply, add, subtract, max lighten. Switch or overlay? Or multiply? I guess multiply would be like the best one. And what you can do is you can just go ahead and play around with your opacity over here to add really strong grains, and in between those strong grains add like softer grains. Another one that we can try just to see how it looks is to have another blend. I'm going to once again blend between these two. And for this blend, what I want to do is I just want to blend basically using like a mask. So let's say that I grab my tile generator over here just to see what it looks like. Let's make this like a little bigger. Change the random seed over here so that we change it. We blur it. And then we add, for example, a histogram scan, which allows us to basically very tightly control our colors. And I'm trying to get like some fill white areas, which means that now, wait, I probably need to like blend between these a bit sharper over here. Now what you can see is that it is basically blending these two nodes wherever there's white. So you can see that we have some large areas, and in between those large areas, we have some small areas. Now, if you feel really adventurous, what you can do is you can go ahead and actually use this blend as the base, which means that now we have like really soft lines, large lines, and super thin lines, all in one go. I quite like this. This has like a lot of really interesting wood. It looks quite overpowering right now, but that's of course something that we're going to fix. I'm just gonna go ahead and have a look in my mask, because right now my mask, it feels a little bit like, yes, it works, but I'm just making sure that the transitions over here. Okay, so yeah, that is pretty soft transitions, I guess, because they are roughly going into the same flow. But what we can do is we can go ahead and grab a mask and add something called a multi-directional warp grayscale over here. Now the cool thing is with the multi-directional warp grayscale, which is, it's already a pretty old node, but what we can do is we can plug in a gradient noise, like for example Clouds 2, and it allows us to manipulate our edges quite a bit. So here if we just do like Clouds 2, and you can see that I set my directions to 4, and if I now set my mode to minimum, you can see that it will affect mostly like our gradient edges, and we can make them feel a lot more natural. You can also see when you switch between directions like 4, 2 and 1, here you can see like 1 becomes just like a normal directional warp, but with 4 it just like adds a nice soft blending between multiple different angles. So this is a great way to like break up your shapes very quickly. Also please note that of course the further we are using Substance Designer, like later on, I will not be explaining everything anymore. I'm just mostly explaining it right now because it's the beginning. Anyway, doing this, now you can probably see like the difference before and then after. It just feels like a little bit more noisy. The only thing that I do not like, however, is that the gradient is a little bit too soft. So I don't know if I maybe want to just go ahead and do this, if that would be good enough. Yeah, that would probably be good enough if I just use if I just do the multi-directional warp before the histogram, and then use my histogram to basically like switch between them. Okay, so we now have this really interesting wood pattern over here that goes between like the thin ones and the large ones. So that's exactly like what I was looking for here. And you also have like the classic, like the long grains like you can see over here, like the really long ones. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to balance everything out a little bit. And for that, what I like to do is I like to, first of all, in this case, because this wood is quite a soft wood, I like to blur it a little bit, because right now it's super sharp. But I like to always blur it using a directional blur, since I don't like blurring something that has a lot of direction with like a normal blur, because then it just looks low resolution. You can see over here, like this is way too intense, but if I go ahead and zoom in, here see, you can see that that very quickly just adds like that extra bit of fading, which I quite like, 0.25. Our goal, by the way, is not to create a height map from this, but to end up with a norm map, and more important, to end up with a map that we can use to basically generate colors from. That's the most important one, actually, in this one. I'm going to go ahead and probably, yeah, I'll show you another technique. Let's see if we can break up these shapes a tiny bit more using something called a slope blur grayscale over here. Now in this node, by default, you want to go ahead and set the samples to 32, intensity to 0, and the mode to minimum. Then what we can do is we can use a clouds too, and I know that we have one over here, but I need to go ahead and like scale this by a lot. Like I don't know if 8 is even enough. And adding this to our slope blur, if we now go ahead and set our intensity, you can see that now here, it breaks up the edges. It does this really strongly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this like very low. 0.05, no, that's too much, 0.01. Maybe, now let's do 0.005, really softly. And maybe my clouds too, I can set this to like 16, to make it a bit smaller. So 16 is smaller, but now I want this to be like even lower, so 0.03. It's very subtle, but it just adds like a little bit of damage to our wood, which might look nice. If it doesn't look nice, then we'll just change it. Okay, cool. At this point, I'm just going to balance out my wood, and I'm going to do that using a histogram range over here, which gives me the option to basically like set the range of my wood, which means that I can like just get rid of like those really strong black to white, and instead make it like just like a little bit of like a softer wood color. And now finally, to leave off probably this chapter, let's go ahead and turn this into a norm map by adding a normal node behind it. And I like to work in OpenGL. And now over here you can see our wood grains. And you can see that the wood grains are working really well. So that's like our base for our wood grains. What I'm going to do in the next chapter is I'm going to give you like, although I cannot really see them here, I feel like it's logical if we like add these knots of our wood, like you can see over here. Sorry, over here. So we're going to add some of those like wood knots that you can see here. And once that is done and we are blending everything together, I don't know, I think at that point we can already probably turn on to like the base color, but let's just wait and see and just make sure that everything looks proper. But anyway, for now, that was it for like our base wood grains. So let's go ahead and continue on to the next chapter.